Okay, welcome back. In this module, we'll be looking at the management station. We'll discuss what the management station is and some of the components that make up the management station. My name is Manuel King, and I will be your instructor. Okay, let's take a look at the agenda of this module. First of all, we'll take a look at some important database files. First file that we'll take a look at is the objects database file. The objects database file is where it stores your network objects, your host objects, and then we'll take a look at the users database file. The user database files is where you store your administrators and different users. And then we'll take a look at the rule base database file, and the rule base is related to all the rules that you create and the rules that you enforce on the firewall. And then we'll take a look at the Gui Db Edit Utility, which is a program that's used to be able to edit and modify the different database files. So next we're going to discuss some important files. I mentioned before there's a database files. There's three databases that are important. The first database is the objects database. The objects database is where you stored all your network objects, your host objects, and these objects are stored in a file called the objects_5_0.c. And this is located in the fwdir conf directory. This objects_5_0.c is where all your objects are stored. Your network objects, your host objects, your firewalls objects. And the next database file is the user database file. The user database file is stored in the fwauth, the ndb file. Again, it's in the fwdir, the conf directory. The fwauth, the ndb is where all your users are stored, your administrators are stored, and all your user accounts. Another important database file is the rule-based database file. The rule-based database file is stored in a file called rulebases_5_0.fws. Again, it's the fwdir.conf directory, and this rule-base is where you store all your rules, or your access lists, or your NATing configurations, all stored in the rulebases_5_0.fws. And this database is stored on the management station. So on the management station, you have three databases. You have the users database, have the objects database, and you have your rule-based database. These are just files that stores all the information. And so when your smart dashboard connects to the management station, it's going to connect to the FWM process, as we stated before. It uses a CPMI protocol to connect. And all these objects need to be sent down to the GUI client. So all this information is then going to be sent over the CPMI channel to the smart dashboard, and the smart dashboard will populate with all the users and rules. Okay, let's take a look at this at command line. We'll launch a PuTTY session. We'll connect to the management station. Let's go to expert mode and change directory to fwdir/conf. And here we have our database. There's a bunch of files in here. Let's take a look at the objects database. And so you'll see that there's a few objects databases. The first objects database, this is the actual database, is the objects_5_0.c. But you also know that there's a backup. So every time you boot up the system, your objects becomes a backup. So it's kind of like the last known good backup. In case your database ever gets corrupted, you have a backup database. Let's go ahead and view this database, cat objects_5. We'll hit the tab for command completion, and you see there's a lot of information. Let's scroll up a little bit so we can take a look. You can actually view it, the objects database. You can view it. You can actually edit this file using the vi command. So if we vi the objects database file, scroll down and we'll see a few things here, a few properties. So if we do a search in vi for my firewall, that's in command mode /GW, which is my gateway's name. I hit enter. There's a few properties with GW. I hit N to go next. And right here we see this is actually my firewall, my gateway here. So let's take a look at this gateway object. This is my firewall object called GW. You'll notice that the line always starts with a colon. A colon tells us this is a new line. You'll see a colon on all these lines. And it always starts with open brackets. Open brackets tells us that there's going to be a lot of information regarding that object. So my gateway object, there's a few lines that define what that object is, like the class name. It tells us that this is a gateway object, a checkpoint gateway object. And it tells us other things like the last modified time. This tells us the last time this object was modified, and who modified it, and from what machine it modified this object. Let's scroll down a little bit to see some other properties. There's a lot of information and parameters regarding this gateway object. Here we see the interface information. These are my interfaces, and I see this is my IP address of one of my interfaces, my network mask of that interface, and the interface name. And if anti-spoofing has been enabled, we see that anti-spoofing is set to true, means it is enabled. So there's some parameters that are empty, like IPv6. There's no information here of IPv6 because I'm not using IPv6. So some are blank, as you see. These are all blank, so there's no information. The fields exist, but there's no actual data regarding those fields. And some fields have data, like the IP addresses field, the mask field, and the interface field, and anti-spoofing is set to true. And so there's a lot of properties. And there are two ways you can make modifications to this. First of all, you use Smart Dashboard to make changes, and any change you make through Smart Dashboard is going to make a change to your firewall object. But some of these properties do not exist in Smart Dashboard. So how do you modify these properties? There's another way. We can use VI to make modifications, but VI is not recommended, maybe not even supported to make changes. And it's not supported because if you make a mistake on this file, then you can corrupt your whole database. And if you corrupt your database, then the management station will not start. And so you won't be able to connect to Smart Dashboard to make the changes or to fix those changes. So it's not supported to use VI, but it is possible to use VI. Another way to make changes to the file is using the Gui Db Edit Utility. And I'll explain the Gui Db Edit Utility further down in this lecture. Also, if you're going to make any changes to this file, it is recommended to make a backup. You can use a backup to make backups of your objects file, and there's a few ways you can do backups. You can use the migrate export utility on the management station to create a backup of your database, which backs up all your database, including your internal certificate of authority and your licenses, etc. Or you can just back up the file using Unix commands. Let's quit this and exit Q exclamation, which exits without saving. Let's take a look at a different database file, the fwauth ndb, which is the user database file. If we ls -al for the long format, fwauth star, you'll notice that there's a few database files. First of all, there is the fwauth.ndb database file. This is my actual database file, and it's about 20K, and was created today on February the 4th. There's another database file, is the fwauth save.ndb, and you'll see that it's saved, so it's actually a backup. So this is the backup of your user database. Let's take a look at this database file. That's vi fwauth.ntab, and let's take a look for a user called Manny. If we go into command mode / Manny, hit enter, there's no user called Manny, pattern not found for Manny. So let's create a user called Manny. So let's go into Smart Dashboard, go to the users and click on new user. Default is good enough. We'll call this user Manny. Let's change the color to, change it to blue. Let's put a phone number like 555 like they do in the movies, 555. Let's expire this user 15th February 5th, which is tomorrow's date. It will expire in 1 day. Alright, and let's say OK. And once again, that's VI the file. Let's take a look and search for Manny. And you'll notice that Manny exists, so I didn't have to save my database. I didn't have to push my policy. User Manny automatically got created. Let's take a look at some of the properties of user Manny. You'll notice that it is a user type. It is user, and the color is blue. It's a Dodger blue. Other things that we see, last modified time, which is Wednesday, February 4th, which is today's date. And it was created by fwadmin user and from awin, which is the GUI PC. This is this PC here that I'm logged into, which connects to the Smart Dashboard. Let's scroll down a little bit and take a look at some other properties. Let's clear the screen here. Here we see the phone number information, 555. Here's when it expires, the February 5th, 2015, which is tomorrow. Okay. Now, one good thing about this database file, if this database file ever gets corrupted, what you could do is delete the file and stop the firewall, and the file will automatically get created. So if we delete the file, that's rmfwauth.ndb, the file is gone, but the backup file still exists. So let's stop the firewall, cp stop, followed by cp start. So we're going to bounce the firewall. Firewall stopping and starting. Now it's finished, so let's do a clear once again and do a ls fwauth. You notice that the file is now back. The fwauth.ndb has now been recreated. And so if the user database ever gets corrupted, all you have to do is delete the file and recreate your users. Okay, next let's take a look at another database, the rule-based database. And you'll notice that there is two files. There is the rule-base underscore 5 underscore 0.fws and another file called .backup. And they're approximately about the same size, created at approximately the same time. Now if we VI this file, VI rule base, let's hit the tab for command completion, and we scroll down to the rule base. We see a rule called many rule. This is the name of the rule called the many rule. This is the service. The service is FTP, and the source is source of management station, which matches my rule that I created here in my smart dashboard. You see that we have the management station rule. The name is many rule. The source is management station, and the service is FTP, which corresponds obviously to what we saw here from the command line with the name of the rule, the service, which is FTP, and the source is the management station. So what happens if the rule base gets corrupted? Well, let me show you what happens. First of all, let me make a copy of the rule base. So copy rule base is underscore 5 fws, and I'm going to call it rule bases underscore 5 underscore 0.fws.many. So this is my backup file, and I'm going to VI the rule base. Let's go to the bottom somewhere, and in here I'm going to put some data. So insert this is test corrupting the database. So I have three files. I have my original rule base file, and it's a little bigger. It's got 3,700 bytes. I have the many backup that I did a backup before I corrupted, and I have the original rule base backup, because these files are only read when the box is booting. So let's bounce the firewall, which means a CP stop followed by a CP start. So it stops and starts the firewall, which is going to disconnect my smart dashboard. There we go. It's disconnected. Connections were lost. Okay, the service have now started. So let's log into smart dashboard once again. It asks me to select the policy I want to open, so we already know there's a problem. And we see that Checkpoint Smart Dashboard has stopped working. We close the program. Because our database is corrupted, we cannot open Smart Dashboard. It's going to give us a bunch of error message, call support, and this is why customers will be calling you. And so there's two solutions. One solution is if he has a backup, he can restore from his backup. The other solution, as I mentioned, is there is a backup file. So let's take a look again at the rule bases star. And so let's rename the rule base backup to the rule base name. And so this is the bigger file. This is the one that's corrupted. So let's get rid of the file that I corrupted. So it's gone. And so that leaves us only with two files, the backup file and the many file. The rule base file has been deleted. So what I'm going to do here is rename the backup file to the rule base file. So I'm going to use the move command, rule bases 5 underscore 0 backup to rule bases.fws. And so the backup file has now been renamed to the rule base file. I still have the many backup in case anything goes wrong. But let me stop the firewall once again. CP stop, CP start. Services will stop and restart. Okay, so they're done. So let's start Smart Dashboard once again and try to log in. And voila, issue is resolved and the case is now closed. And so that's a quick way of restoring your database, because there's always a backup of all three databases. You just rename your backups to your database name and you should be up and going. But don't try this at home. Make sure you have backups. Thank you. Okay, now let's talk about editing the database. As mentioned, the database sits on the management station. You have the objects database, the users database, and the rule-based database. So how do you edit these databases? Well, number one is you use Smart Dashboard. And Smart Dashboard is your primary method of editing the database. You connect to Smart Dashboard with your username and password, and anytime you make a change to an object, it's going to make a change to the objects database. If you add a user or administrator, it's going to add that user in the users database. If you create a rule, it's going to make a modification to the rule-based database. So anytime you make a change in Smart Dashboard, it's going to make a change to the database file. Now, there are some advanced properties in objects and users and rules that do not come up in Smart Dashboard. You don't have the options to make these advanced changes. And so there's a few other methods that you can use to make changes to the database. Method number 2, as mentioned before, is to use the VI command, the Linux command, and in VI you can make changes to the objects database. You can VI and go to advanced properties and certain features and attributes of the object and make modifications to it. The problem with using VI is not everyone is familiar with using VI commands, and it requires a level of knowledge to be able to make modifications to the objects database. Also, the fact is that the user's database is a binary database file, and you cannot use VI to make changes to it. So you're kind of limited with VI on what changes you can make, and also the experience level that you have with VI. And so the third option is to use the Gui Db Edit Utility, which is a program that you use to connect to the management station from the Smart Console, connects to the management station, and opens the database, and then you can make changes to the database. And so there is a Gui Db Edit.exe file that's stored on the same folder that stores the Smart Dashboard GUI client programs. And so you can launch the Gui Db Edit, connect to the management station, use the same username and password that you would use to connect to Smart Dashboard, Smart Retracker. And so after you're authenticated to the management station, you can make modifications. And the fourth option is using the db edit from the command line. So I can actually use db edit command line and make changes to the database. And this is an advanced tool. It requires some advanced knowledge to be able to make changes to the database, but it's very powerful and efficient for advanced users. And so why so many different methods? Well, you can use Smart Dashboard as I just mentioned, and most of the properties are in there, but there's advanced features that are not in there, and so you have a few other options. Now, VI, as mentioned, is an advanced tool, and it's not recommended, in some cases not supported to use VI, just for the fact that it can cause corruptions on your database. And the most popular method is using the Gui Db Edit. It's a graphical user interface tool that most customers will use to make changes or advanced changes to the database. But it's a hidden tool because we don't want people to make changes to the database without knowing what they're doing, so it does require some advanced knowledge. And the command line version of the db edit utility is used for advanced command line based changes using scripts or programs. And so now let me show you how to make changes using these utilities. Okay, let's open Smart Dashboard. Every time you make a change to an object in Smart Dashboard, it's going to make a change to the database. Depends on what object you're making a change to. So if I make a change to my gateway object, maybe I'll change the color from black to fire brick. We'll say OK. This is an object, so it's going to be saved in the objects database. If I make a change to the users, if I go to the users, we have Manny user, and I'll change the color of Manny to blue. It's going to make a change to the users database. And if I add a rule, maybe a rule below my rule base, this is my cleanup rule, this is going to be added to my rule-based database. And all I have to do is save. This information will be saved to my database. Now there's advanced properties in my database that I might need to make changes. Some of these advanced properties you know as global properties. In the global properties, there's a lot of different fields that I can enter. Again, this information is stored in the different databases. If I go to Smart Dashboard Customization, there's Advanced Configuration. If we click on the Configure icon here, there's also a bunch of different features that we can enable relating to secure remote and VPNs, etc., etc. These are like the most common features of the advanced features. Checkpoint has placed it in a centralized location, so you don't have to go directly to the database, the VI to database, or use the Gui Db Edit. You can go directly through here in the advanced customization section. And the other tool that I mentioned is the Gui Db Edit. Where is this Gui Db Edit? If you look in the Start menu for all the programs in the Checkpoint folder, there is no Gui Db Edit. So where is this program? If I right click on Smart Dashboard and go to Properties, and we'll notice that location of Smart Dashboard where it's located. The Gui Db Edit will be in the same location. So let's go to File, Open Location. And let's search for star.exe. We'll look for all the exe files. And here we see a bunch of exe files, including the firewall policy exe, which is a Smart Dashboard, plus the Gui Db Edit. Now, in order to open Gui Db Edit, I should close Smart Dashboard. So let's close Smart Dashboard, and we'll save those changes. Smart Dashboard. So now let's launch the Gui Db Edit. You'll notice that it looks very similar to Smart Dashboard. It's Checkpoint Database Tool. So the Gui Db Edit is also called the Database Tool. Let's log in using the same username and password. We're connecting to the management station. And in here we have not only the properties that we saw in Smart Dashboard, but additional properties that don't even exist in Smart Dashboard. So I can go in here and make fancy changes to different properties. So what kind of information can you make changes to? Well, pretty much anything and everything that you can change to the user database or the rule-based database, the objects database. You can use the checkpoint database tool. So we have our administrators table. In administrator table, we have the FW admin, and we have information regarding the administrator. We have our GUI clients regarding who can connect to Smart Dashboard. We have information like global properties and all the properties relating to the firewall properties. This is all firewall related properties. We have the network objects that we've created, the gateway object, the management object. We can make changes to these objects. We can make changes to the policies, the firewall policies, standard rule base. In here, using the Gui Db Edit tool, we can make changes to users, like Mani user. We can change different properties of the Mani user. And so there's a bit of information that I need to explain. First of all, we have the tables section. The tables section has lists of all the different tables, the users tables, the VPN table. And then we have the object itself. So if we go to the table, we can view the different objects. In this case, Mani is the user object. And in Mani, we have a field name, and a field name of things like the color information. What color? Well, it could be a string value. That means it's going to be something that we type in. And so the string is Dodger blue. This is the color. Also, we have some valid values. So what kind of things can we enter? Well, the days we can enter from 0 to 127. We have the default value, which is set to 127, and we have a description of the field, which is days of the week. So there's different information. And so the type is a few kinds. There's a Boolean. I can change the value to false or true. So that's a Boolean, either on or off. We have a string where we can enter different values and other information regarding the user Mani. Okay, and so you can get more information on how to use the Gui Db Edit on our checkpoint site. Either search Gui Db Edit or the checkpoint database tool, and there's a bunch of SKs that reference how to make changes to information here in the database. Finally, let's make a change. We'll change administrator. Let's double click on administrator. We'll change the value from false to true, so Mani is now an administrator. And we obviously need to save the change, so let's go to File and Save All, so the change has been saved. And if you see that the option is grayed out, that's because you have Smart Dashboard open. You have to close Smart Dashboard. You cannot have Smart Dashboard open and modify and save changes to the database. So that's the reason I closed Smart Dashboard earlier. And so the Gui Db Edit is the supported method of making changes to the database. You can use the other methods, but the Gui Db Edit is the recommended and supported method of making changes to the database, because it is easy and intuitive. But before attempting this procedure, make sure you have a backup of your database in case anything does go wrong. And the last method of making changes to the database is from the command line. Let's log into the management station. We need to go to expert mode, and db edit is the command. We need to specify the management station IP address 10.1.1.101, and the administrator is fwadmin, and the password. Okay, so now we're in the command line version of db edit. It's a little bit tricky to navigate. If we type -H for help, hit enter, it's going to give you a bunch of information regarding the things you can do in db edit. Let's scroll up to the top here, and you'll see some examples and some commands. Let's take a look at some of these commands. We can create objects and objects names. We can modify the object. We can rename the object. We can do updates. We can delete information. Let's take a look at the examples. We have some examples directly on the console. We can make modifications to a port. So you would type modify services my service port and the port number that you want to change to. And there's a bunch of examples here that you can go and read about how to change things. And here's a nice example of how to set the password. Set password ABC1234. Using the command line version of db edit is challenging because it requires you to have some experience and advanced knowledge of database structures. But it's a very powerful tool because customers can add commands into a file and run scripts to create objects and rules to populate their database quickly and fast. In addition, we have a lot of SKs on our knowledge base that explains how to make modifications to the database using the command line version of db edit utility. Alright, so that concludes this lecture. Let's summarize the discussion that we had during this lecture. And then we had a discussion of the database files. We looked at the objects database file, the user database file, and the rules database file. And finally, we had a discussion on Gui Db Edit and how to modify the database files. And we also saw how to modify using VI, Smart Dashboard, and DB Edit from the command line.
Checkpoint. We secure the future.